It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Ruth Berlinger. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Jerusalem. And Ruth, you were born in Poland.
Yes, I was born in Poland, in Warsaw, in 1931. I was very lucky because I was born to a couple of wonderful parents. I had one sister, 9 years older. Her name was Miriam. And here you can see the picture of my father, Koppel, and my mother, Eugenia. So I had a very happy and easy childhood. I had everything I could dream of, and we lived in a beautiful apartment in not the Jewish part of Warsaw, and I had a luxurious life, I would like to say. And everything came to an end when the war started, 1939. It was finished with my childhood.
But Ruth, can I ask, you at one time, your mother was worried that you weren't eating.
That's right. That's right. I don't know how much details about my childhood I am supposed to tell you.
Please, as much as it's unbelievable.
Yes. Well, I had only one sorrow in my young life. I didn't want to eat. So my parents called several doctors to come and check me. And I don't remember all these doctors, but only one, and his name was Dr. Janusz Korczak. Sure. And I don't know if it's familiar to you, but I am very proud of being, I suppose, the only still alive patient of Dr. Janusz Korczak. And he was a wonderful, sympathetic, jolly, clever, famous doctor and author and publicist and journalist and human being. And I had a great joy of his visits. That was the only doctor I remember from before the war.
Did he come to your home?
Right.
Wow.
He did.
And you remember, you recall the visits when
yes,
he came?
Yes, I do, because he didn't like my parents to be, or my mother to be in the same room. He wanted to talk to me, and he talked to everything else except my condition, so to say. He was talking about his books, and I had some of his books at home, and the theater plays and projects he had, and a lot of funny things. And when he left, last time he was in our place, I remember he told my mother, I was about 6-7 years of age, that he's quite sure that there is nothing wrong with this young lady, but I was obviously quite spoiled. And my mother was, of course, not very happy with this judgment. Anyway, he said that he's sure that if there would ever be lack of food, I would be the first one to ask for more food. And he was absolutely right. So already, I think, 2 years after the war started, and as you know, Poland was the first country in Europe attacked by Germans. And it was quite hard because Warsaw was heavily bombed and many houses were destroyed, many people were killed, but our house was untouched, just by chance. And after 3 weeks the war was over and we saw the first German soldiers and officers on our streets. And then something very different happened. I could already read fluently because I had the first year in an ordinary elementary school behind me, so I was good in reading, and I saw that what was written in all the affiche, how do you say, posters on the walls, there was a difference in laws for Jewish people and for non-Jewish people. And everything which was supposed to be for Jewish people was worse than for the others. And there were new laws every day. Almost every day there was something new. And the Germans told us what would happen to everyone who would not obey the laws, what kind of punishments there would be. So I asked my parents, how come that there is a difference in law between those for Jewish people and non-Jewish people? And then I remember very well my father telling me that this is a big question and he cannot explain it to me because I'm too little and too silly and too not mature enough to understand this very big problem and question, but he promises me that when I will be more mature and grown up, he will try to explain it to me, the difference, and because I am too small to explain. And since then, I think it's more or less 85 years ago, and all this time I have been asking myself and other people for some logical answer to this question, and I still don't have it because there is no answer. It's the answer is only hate of Jewish people all around the world, and we still don't know why, because there is no logic. So the first year of occupation was hard, but not so terrible. We still lived in our apartment, but during this time there was a place in Warsaw being built up, and that place was called ghetto, and we didn't know what ghetto was. It was a place now surrounded by high walls. On the top of the walls there were barbed wire, and there were German soldiers watching the gates, and it looked very scary. And quite soon there was announcements that within a couple of weeks, I think, I don't remember exactly how long time it was supposed to take, but all the Jews of Warsaw are going to be deported and transported into ghetto and locked in. And of course no one wanted to go there because it looked very scary, but we had no choice. So in autumn, the year after the beginning of war, of occupation. All the Jews of Warsaw and Warsaw's surroundings were transported into ghetto. And it was a question, this I heard many years after, when I was big enough to understand some numbers and facts. It was a question of 350,000 people, Jewish people. So we were in ghetto, and we were in an apartment, 14 people, everyone, the parents of my father and his siblings with the spouses and some small cousins of mine. And it was very crowded and very dirty outside our apartment. It was a terrible place where many people, especially small kids, didn't have any place to go, and small kids were sleeping on the streets. They had lost their parents and their siblings. They were left alone, and they were begging people who passed by to give them something to eat. It was a miserable, miserable life. As it was so dirty, and there was lack of food from the very beginning, and so crowded, many epidemic diseases started, and among them was one of the worst epidemic diseases was typhus. And typhus killed hundreds of people every week. And my grandmother on my mother's side was one of the first victims. I just couldn't accept it, and I was sorry, terribly sorry to hear that she was not alive anymore. The Germans did whatever they wanted. If they wanted to shoot a Jewish person, they did, and no one would question it or tell him that this is not done, because it was they had the power and we had nothing to say. We were just numbers and victims. And from the very first moment, everybody who entered ghetto was just a number, and everything which he or she did before was of no value. There was no past, no success, no job, no dream, nothing independent of who this person was and who, if it was a doctor or a carpenter or a poet, whatever he or she did before was of no value. We were just people who were supposed to be killed by the Germans, because that was the main goal of Germany from the very beginning of the Hitler's era. And that was so important for them that even quite many years after, when the war has been going on many years, and Germans were at last losing the war, it was still so important for them that the main task, the main duty of them, the main goal was to try to the last moment to kill Jews wherever they were. There were some terribly sadistic people in ghetto who, among the soldiers and officers, who really enjoyed what they were doing. I'm sure that not everybody did, and I'm sure there were some people, German people, who did not like what they did, but they had no say, because the moment they would not do what they were supposed to, they would be killed. But there were some other people who obviously very much enjoyed what he did, and among them was a madman by nickname Frankenstein. And this man had a hobby, and that hobby was to kill small children. And everybody knew that when it would happen that a child, and this Frankenstein was of course not his real name, would meet face to face, that would be the last moment of the life of this child. And it happened so that once Frankenstein was there when I was on the street. I was sent by my parents to fetch something. I, of course, don't remember what it was. But suddenly he was there and he stopped me. He pulled up his revolver and pointed to my face, and he told me to turn around and go back to the gate from where I came to my door, and walk back slowly, he said, smiling. And of course I was absolutely sure that that was the last moment of my life. And I went back, and I fainted when I came in. Some neighbors of ours were watching from their window and told it afterwards to my parents. For some reason, Frankenstein did not kill me, but he went around the corner and saw another little girl and shot her instead. There were many selections and razzia on the street every day, and life was getting more and more miserable because there was so many diseases and so many violent happenings. And we did not go down to the street, all of us, because very often we were told to come down to the street immediately and stand in rows, 4 and 4 usually. Then the Germans came with trucks and transported people to a place called Umschlagsplatz. That was a place from which the trains were leaving from Warsaw to different concentration camps. And no one wanted this either, of course, and no one was asked. So we had to, the grown-ups, build some small hiding places in the apartment where we lived. And when this order came to come down immediately to the street, we usually were hidden. I mean, we, the children, were hidden, and the old people, for instance, my grandparents, because we knew that we would be taken immediately to this place from which the trains were going. And this this was terribly hectic, and we were always in a hurry to make everything immediately. And many times the Germans came up to apartments and took people straight from there too. At one of the terrible selections in ghetto, which was now a complete hell on earth, one of the selections, we were told by the Germans that it's going to take many hours because it's one of the big selections. They didn't tell us why and how. So we decided that only my parents and my sister Miriam and myself will go. It was not good to take the other people, my small cousin boys, Alexander and Victor, and my old grandparents and some of the ladies. So only the four of us went, because we had to give the Germans some amount of people from each house or from each apartment. And this was a terrible selection. We were standing on our knees and proceeding along a long way to the end, where there were two German officers looking at the people who came forward, who were in the first row, and have a look at them and tell them either to the right, which would mean that these people, the four of them, were still allowed to stay a bit more in ghetto, or to the left, which means transport to this place from which the trains were going to concentration camps. And when we came to the end of this terrible waiting, my father and one of the officers, there were two of them, looked at each other, and they saw that they knew each other well. They were friends from before the war. They were business friends. They have been traveling in Europe together. And my father was visiting this man in his home in Hamburg, in Germany, several times. And this German person was visiting us in Warsaw. And he had, I would say, 1 second or less to decide, and he looked at my father and shouted to the right and saved our life. So we were allowed to stay a bit more. After the war, it's important for me to tell it to you. After the war, my father did his utmost to try to find this man, our savior, through the Red Cross and other means, and it took my father a long time until the bad news came that the whole family were dead. It had nothing to do with Jewish problem. They were in Hamburg, and Hamburg was heavily bombed by Americans and English other forces, airplanes. So that was a great sorrow for us to know that we can't ever thank this man for saving us. Anyway, after this, what happened, we came back to our place and discovered that everyone was taken. My grandparents, my small cousins, the siblings of my father, everybody was taken to the trains and transported to one of the concentration camps, and we never saw them again. They were murdered. I don't remember much of our existence in ghetto after what happened, because it was such a shock, it was such a terrible thing that we were alone, but together. But all the family were not with us anymore. And my parents and my sister, who was much older, so she was a grown-up, they decided that we have to leave ghetto as soon as possible. And this could be done sometimes, if you were lucky, by bribing one of the soldiers who were watching the gate. And sometimes it was all right. He turned his back to people who were walking out to the Aryan side, and sometimes he took the money and shot the people anyway. But again, we were lucky. All the situations which we survived was just by coincidence. I don't believe in anything saying that we were worse, more than other people who were killed. It's just by chance. So we bribed, my father gave some money to the soldier, and we were on the Aryan side and left ghetto. And that was less than 2 weeks before the uprising of ghetto. So we were in Warsaw Ghetto from the first moment of its existence until the end. Not only that, we got to know before we left ghetto that the place we were going to had only room for 2 people, not 4. So we had to decide who will stay and who will go. And that was a very, very hard decision. And this decision was that Mother and me would leave, and my father and Miriam should stay, because there was no room for all of us. So we left, and the first step on the Aryan side, where we were supposed to stay overnight before we came to the destination, was in our old building where we lived before the war, but not our apartment. Some neighbors, some non-Jewish Polish neighbors, were announced that we would come, and they were extremely afraid of this visit, because that would be, if they would be discovered, they would be executed. So they took a big risk, and they did, and this is of importance for me to tell, what happened there. They were nice to us. They were extremely afraid. They wanted to get rid of us as soon as possible. It was a middle-aged couple with a little daughter, about 9-10 years old, about my age. And this girl was not allowed to be with us and with the parents while we were discussing what happened and what's going to happen the next day. So she was not there, but she was listening at the door, behind the door. And she came in and she asked her parents, "Who are these people? Are they Jewish?" Because she heard the name several times. And her father said, "Get out of here. I told you not to be here. Go back to your room." And she said, "I want to know, are these people really Jewish?" So the parents said, "Yes, they are. We'll talk about it later." So the girl took up her fingers and put it like this. And she said, "But they have got no horns, so they can't be Jewish." And that was such a terrible blow to us. Again, that was the first meeting with the free people on the Aryan side. And this girl, who was already a student in her school, and she had friends, and obviously everyone told her that Jews have horns. The next day we came to our destination, the mother and myself, and it was wonderful to meet with my mother's sister and her little family who were there. But we were desperate. My mother was crying all the time because we didn't know if we would ever see my father and my sister again. And ghetto was already burning. We saw around the clock, we saw red sky of the fires, and there were always red sky all the time and a lot of black pieces of whatever it was in the sky and falling down outside the windows. And we were desperate that we were not together, and we didn't know if my father and my sister will meet with us. And after some days they came, and it was one of the most happy moments in my life, in all our life. They happened to bribe again. They still had some money left. They bribed a driver of a truck. There were some trucks transporting food out from ghetto, because there was a lot of food prepared for all the German soldiers. And this was, of course, valuable, not the Jewish living person, but the food. So they transported it to the last moment from ghetto, and I think, as I know, that not last but one carriage transporting this food out from ghetto, my father and Miriam, my sister, were hiding. So that's how they came out, in a very, very terrible condition. During the uprising, my sister Miriam was writing short memoirs every day. And these memoirs of her, which are interrupted for some reason because she couldn't continue, she had to leave this place, she and my father, but the memoirs they survived. And these memoirs, plus notes of my father, which he was writing while we were hiding on the Aryan side, the non-Jewish side. These two parts are two parts of a book issued by Yad Vashem a few years ago. And it's a very unique document because it didn't happen many times that both the memoirs and the people who wrote it survived. So in this case we are really a very unique little family, I mean the four of us. To be in hiding is terrible, it's unhuman. People in hiding have got no rights. We were never allowed to make any kind of noise, never wear shoes, never come close to a window because we would be afraid to be seen by some neighbors, discovered. We were never allowed to light a lamp, never to flush a toilet, never to do anything, never to talk in human voices. We just had to whisper and to react very quickly in case some of the neighbors would have a suspicion and ring the bell and come in. And we didn't know how long the war would go on. And if we knew how terrible it would be, I am not sure that we would leave ghetto. And it went on for 2 years. We were not always together. Sometimes there was a emergency situation and we had to leave the place immediately and go to another place for hiding. And very soon especially my parents were in a very bad physical situation, and my sister, who was a beautiful, jolly, happy, singing, beautiful girl, she was now about 20. She got very depressed and she started not to be with us. She didn't talk, she didn't react, she didn't want to eat the little food we had. And it was very, very terrible to see how she disappeared from us. And my mother was working with her very hardly, we were always sitting on the floor. And mother told her stories about how it was just a few years ago when she was a happy young girl surrounded by boyfriends and girlfriends and dancing and singing and excellent in school, and everything was so wonderful. And now she was in such depression. We asked the woman who was giving us shelter, and she did it for money only. She didn't like Jews. Everybody who was giving a shelter to a Jew was paid. Not by the people who were in hiding. We were not, besides we had no money anymore, very little money, but we were not allowed to pay. The payment came from a contact person who also risked his or her life, and our contact person, her name was Wanda Rothenberg. You can find her name in Yad Vashem. She was a wonderful hero, one of our heroes from wartime. She came now and then, we never knew when. She was a young girl, perhaps 22, 23 years old, looking very un-Jewish, and her visits were wonderful experience for us. She didn't stay long because she had many families to visit and to pay for. She was hiding the money, and she didn't make any notes of the names and addresses of the people she was going to visit, because if in case she would be caught, that would be complete disaster for all of us. So she memorized it. And she came now and then, and she survived too, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing. She had already lost her parents in ghetto of Warsaw, and her sister was killed too during the uprising. But she survived, Wanda survived, and she came very early. I think it was just at the end of Palestine period, 48, 47, 48, she came to Palestine. And of course, we visited her many times after. Well, we were hiding in different families. I told you about this woman who was paid. The payment for people in hiding came from different underground organizations, both Jewish, mostly American, but even non-Jewish. And I can't tell you where and how, but these are facts which can be checked anytime. This terrible hiding, which unfortunately we were not always together. Sometimes when we had to run or to go to another place, it was only for 2 people or 1 person, and we had to divide the family, and each time we didn't know if we will meet again. The last place, because the bad place I told you about, it was a policewoman giving us shelter, and she had everything. She had so many warm pillows and covers in her room. She didn't want to give us anything. We slept every night, and it was a very old house without, of course, without central heating, without any heating. And it was blowing cold from the windows. And we were sleeping on the floor without a mattress every night, night after night, night after night. She didn't want to give us the pillows who were in her room. And she didn't want to share anything, but the worst thing was that we didn't have anything to do. We didn't have anything to read. She didn't want to give us anything. We asked her, begged her to give us some old newspaper, anything. She had so much to read. We saw it in her room. But she said that you don't need to read. Your kind doesn't need to read. So that's why my sister was getting completely depressed. And I am sure that I would follow her example. But my father was always a fantastic, full of initiative person. He asked the woman if he could buy for him some, how do you call it, thick paper, like to make a box for a cake.
Cardboard?
Cardboard. Some cardboard pieces, scissors, and some colored pencils, and some flour to make glue of. And he told me, my father, that from tomorrow the 2 of us are going to make a big job. I am your boss, and you are appointed, and I don't want to hear anything from you that you are tired, that you are hungry. All of us are hungry the whole time. So this is no excuse. We are going to build a doll's house. And he made a project. It was his occupation. And we worked every day, very hard, the 2 of us, he and me. And there was so much work. And he was the architect, and it was not his profession. He was a businessman in wood business. But it was very close, and he always had these abilities. And I had already my artistic abilities. So it took us a long time of every day's hard work, and then a beautiful house was there with several rooms, with colored carpets on the floor with wallpapers all over, beautifully done by myself. It took me many hours for each room to make small flowers on the walls. And there were doors and there were small chairs, and on the chairs some small people were sitting. It was absolutely wonderful, and it, for sure, it saved my mental life.
Did your sister also join?
My sister did not. She was very depressed, and she was doing nothing. We had to leave that place very quickly, and to the last place during our hiding life in hiding, we came to a completely different place. It was a middle-aged woman, Helena. She had an old, much older husband who was sick and always in bed, and she had through her new marriage to this man, her son, who was a bit older than I. He was perhaps 13 or 14 years of age, and I was very happy to see a young person. I only saw my family during such a long time, but he was a terrible, perverse boy, and he liked very much to torture animals. And that was the last thing I wanted to see. It was very bad. But what was good in this new place was all the books. All the walls were full of books, and Helena told us that we are free to choose whatever we want, just to put it back on its original place. And this was such a wonderful experience, and the three of us were so happy, and even my sister Miriam, who was really forced to look at a book by my mother, and they talked about a book which Miriam had at home and when she knew, and slowly she came back to us. So we were reading, all four of us, as much as you can't imagine, from the first light in the morning until it was dark. And this was a wonderful time in our life. We ate together with Helena and her husband. Every day the same, some kind of porridge without any sugar, without any milk, there was some oil or something in it. It was a terrible taste. I can still remember how terrible it was, but there was nothing else, so we ate it, and we ate it together. So then, after a very long period of time, we were liberated by the Russian army, and we should have been very happy if we didn't lose our family members. So no one was jumping for joy. The people who were jumping for joy, as you can see from pictures, for instance in Sweden, where there was no war, they had no idea. They were just hearing the rumors of what happened around them, so they could afford to jump for joy and to kiss the soldiers, and this was not natural. The confetti you saw in several films had nothing to do with reality. We decided, as my parents were in a bad physical, even mental, but physical state, that we must go to a place where they could try to recover and to build up their bodies. They were sick, they were miserable. And my father, who had some relations, business relations with Sweden before the war, tried to get in touch with them. He did, and he got an answer that they might try to help him. So we decided to go to Sweden, and in autumn 1945, I was almost 14, we came to Sweden, and everything was very different, peaceful. Nothing was destroyed, no one was killed.
Ruth, can I just ask, from your family, who survived from your extended family?
Some siblings of my father survived, but my small cousins were killed. My grandparents were killed, and some of his siblings with wives. There were 5 men and 1 daughter who was killed too. So most of the family members were killed, but some survived. Not the people who were sent to concentration camps. They were killed, all of them. But there were some people who never entered ghetto, who were in Shanghai, for instance. One brother was in Shanghai. And so of these people, a couple of them survived.
And did you ever go back to your home before you went to Sweden? Did you go back to the place before the war that you lived in your...
Yes, when we were liberated by Russians, by the Russian army, we went, this was in a place a little bit outside center of Warsaw. And of course we went to see the place from our place, but there was not. I think 80% of Warsaw was bombed and destroyed. So we didn't have the house, it didn't exist, and the street didn't exist, and the part of the town didn't exist. It was ruins, only ruins. So we had nothing to long back to, because it was not there anymore.
And Ruth, can I ask, when did your family really get to know about the horrors of Treblinka and Auschwitz, and was it straight after the war, or you had an inkling during the war as well?
During the war we only heard rumors, and there was an incident in Warsaw Ghetto when some young people were transported with the trains to one of the concentration camps. And at the arrival, their parents, their small siblings were killed, but these young people were kept in this concentration camp because they were needed to produce something which was good for Germany. And these young people who lost their parents and their families and their friends, immediately they decided to go back to Warsaw Ghetto and to try to come in order to inform people how it was in such a concentration camp. And they did. They smuggled themselves in. Not all of them survived the long walking from concentration camp back to Warsaw, because they were shot on the way. But those who succeeded in going back into ghetto spread around and told people not to believe anything, because the concentration camps were death camps. And the only people who might survive there a little while were some young people who were needed for work. All the others would be
killed.
Yes, killed. So that made the knowledge about what happened in the concentration camp, the knowledge about it was completely different.
So maybe that's one of the reasons why there was the uprising, because they realized there was no
Yes,
no alternative.
Yes, could be, but when it was uprising, the ghetto was almost diminished anyway. There were very few people left. Most of the people were already killed and sent away, and there was not so many fighters, as you know.
Yeah.
Only some young people who were fighting against the army of Germany. So anyway, we were in Sweden and everything was peaceful and everything was terrible because my parents went sick from the very first day. My father had heart attacks, my mother had surgeries. My sister left us very, very soon, and she left for Palestine, which was just around, must have been 47, 48. And she met a man who lived already in Palestine, who came from Poland as well. And they came back to Sweden, where we lived, and they were married in the big synagogue of Stockholm. And they settled down in Tel Aviv. Of course, they are gone now. I mean, she was much, much older. But their children, a son with the family and daughter with the family, are our very close and good friends. And then it took some years after, during this few years, the three of us, because Miriam was already gone to her beloved Israel, my parents decided that they would send me to school from the very beginning. And I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to play. I was never given a chance to be a child since I was 8. And I was not very old now. But they said no, out of question, school is most important. So they sent me to school, of course a non-Jewish school, and I suffered terribly. I didn't understand one word of Swedish, and I didn't know any word, not one word of any other language, and it was a very tough and hard time. It took me about a year to learn the new language, and then it was a bit better, but the young people in my class didn't understand who I was. They thought I was very odd, and I was very different and very un-Swedish. After high school, I went to an art school, and by that time my father was already doing they were doing better concerning their health, and my father was already doing some, not big, but money. And then one day they decided it's time to go to Israel. Israel was already established. But then by that time, it must have been at 1950, I met a young man, and we were very much in love, and we had to decide if I would go with my wonderful parents and settle down in Israel and be with my sister or close to my sister, or if I would marry a man I didn't know. But I decided, it was a very, very difficult decision for all of us, and for some reasons the young man couldn't yet go to Israel. So we got married, and
we're going to just show here is
yes, please.
The very young man.
This young man is sitting here.
This is Shlomo.
Right.
And Shlomo, just a little bit, Shlomo, you were born in Germany.
Yes,
In which town?
in a small town by name Schönlanke in Schlesien in eastern Germany. And my father was a rabbi, and that was his first rabbinate. But already in 1932 he wanted to leave Germany. He felt it was not good for Jews, so he tried to find some place in Europe where he could go, and he got two offers, one from Paris and one from Malmö in Sweden, and he went to Malmö, and he was one of 60 candidates, and they finally took out 3 candidates to come and give a test sermon. My father was one of the 3, and he got the job. So in this way, he and my mother and I and my sister left Germany and came to Sweden in 1932.
And it saved your life.
Yes, so I'm not a survivor in the original sense, but I'm a survivor because Sweden never was taken into war. So I was very, very lucky that my father was so skilled that he got the job and could leave Germany.
And how long was he a chief rabbi in Malmö?
He was there until 1946. after the war, including the rescue with the white buses of survivors from Bergen-Belsen and other camps who came to Sweden. And then he became chief rabbi in Helsinki in Finland, where he was 6 years. And then he went to Amsterdam and spent the rest of his life there until he died in 1985.
Wow. And do you remember the survivors coming to Malmö?
If I remember the
survivors coming from Bergen-Belsen?
Yes, certainly. It was in 1945, and I was already 15, 16 years old. So of course I remember. And my father was day and night, and left. Before that, all the Danish Jews, almost all the Danish Jews, were rescued to Sweden, and they all came to Malmö and neighboring.
And you remember the Danish Jews coming as well?
Very well.
Wow.
Very well. And this is what my father got from the Danish Jews for saving the...
It's really amazing in recognition.
It was in 1943 when the Germans occupied Denmark.
And your father is one of those that helped when they came to Sweden?
Yes, yes. So he has really been there in a very, very dramatic and critical period in Malmö. But finally Malmö was so small, he wanted to come to a little bit more Jewish place, and therefore he decided to go to Amsterdam and was one of the 4 chief rabbis of Holland. And he was there 32 years until he died.
And can I ask, do you remember the Danish Jews when they came? Did you have contact with the Danish Jews?
Absolutely, absolutely, because suddenly the number of Jews in Malmö almost doubled. They came about 2,000 Danish Jews to Malmö, including the Jewish choir, including 2 chazanim. So our synagogue was suddenly a very, very fine place. We never had a choir before, and so on and so on. So the Danish Jews were, and Danish and Swedish are very similar languages, so people understand each other. They were not alien, they were already close friends. And after the war ended, they went all back to Denmark. There were about 400 Danish Jews, old people and so, who were not rescued. They were taken to Theresienstadt, and many of them died there.
And did you have any friends did you make any friends amongst the Danish children?
Yes, certainly. Certainly. Certainly good friends.
It's wonderful.
Ruth,
can I just ask you if...
Yes, but I have to go quite soon.
Okay.
Yes.
Ruth, I just want to ask you and Shlomo as well. But Ruth, if I can just go back to... It's unbelievable, both of you, in a minute.
Take some.
Okay. Ruth, if I could just ask you, what you've gone through, I mean, you've seen the most dramatic, most harrowing part of Jewish history, the near destruction and then the rebirth of the State of Israel, but you've seen unbelievable things that we can't even comprehend. What message do you give to your grandchildren and to the future generations? If people ask you, what message do you give from what you've experienced and what you've seen?
Go on being proud of being Jewish. This is very important. But in order to continue to be a proud Jew and be allowed to wear a kippah wherever you are going, you have to fight anti-Semitism. Don't be passive. Try to make some efforts to talk to people who don't know why they are hating the Jews, why they are doing all this effort to diminish the people of Jewish faith, or to get us out of Israel. Try to get many clever people to meet perhaps our enemies and to talk to them. I don't know in what way, because I've never got the recipe for how to act. But this situation is impossible, and it's getting worse and worse. So my hope is that something soon will happen which might change the attitude of these haters to something more positive. I can't tell you because I haven't got the recipe.
But you and your husband decided to make Aliyah and
Yes.
come to live in Israel.
Of course, yes.
And
And
you're
we are
happy?
very happy about it. Very, very happy about it.
Shlomo, if I can ask, what message do you give? What message can you impart to the next generations?
First of all, that it's a great, great joy to live in Jerusalem. Since my childhood, and I've heard about Jerusalem, im Ischachech Jerusalem, Tishkach Yemini, and that was the dream, and my father was a very great Zionist at that time, and like Ruth's father was also before the war very big Zionist. So for us, for Ruth and me, it was natural and wonderful to come to not only to Israel but to Jerusalem.
Wow. So I just want to thank you both. 1 minute. Just going to come through. Just one second. I'm going to come through here.
Tobias måste gå.
So,
Ja, und en bild av oss och så kan du
so
gå.
both to Ruth and to Shlomo, I'm so grateful to you both. There are no words, really. It's just been the most unbelievable honor and privilege to be in your home, to hear your stories, to meet two of the most remarkable people I've ever met. And you should just have Mazel Brocha at Meivesrim. Can see you happily married. I should also ask, what is the recipe for your unbelievable happy marriage as well?
We can't say it's love.
That's wonderful.
Yes, and a lot of work.
But you should just have Mazel and Brocha and just all of Hashem's blessings. And you said it's by chance. I really believe it. You had miracles, Nissim, such incredible miracles in your lives.
Yes, yes.
That thank God that you're alive, and thank God, Baruch Hashem, that you're well, and you should just both have Mazel Brocha and Meivesrim. Thank you so much.
It was a big pleasure for us
Thank
to
you
have
very
you
much.
here in our home.
Absolutely. We thank you very much.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to you both.
Do you think we could have a copy of this?
With the greatest pleasure, absolutely.
Yes, so can you...
Ruth, this is the book that your sister and your father wrote, that is
Right.
published by Yad Vashem. Shlomo, Ruth's father, Koppel,
Pizyc, wrote it in Ivrit because
In Hebrew.
he was in Hebrew. He went to a Hebrew school in Warsaw before the war and could fluently speak and write Hebrew.
and this is what he wrote while he was in hiding in
Yes,
the...
in ghetto and
This is from the...
yeah. And this book is translated into Polish, but not because of lack of money, not yet into
Please God,
English.
into English. And Ruth's sister, she wrote it in...
Ruth's sister Miriam wrote it in Polish, and it was translated into Ivrit.
Here's the Polish. And we even have the date, 1939. And this
the-
book was published by Yad Vashem.
by Yad Vashem, yeah. And the foreword was written by Ruth.
That's amazing. And this is the... And here we have Miriam and Koppel. Shlomo, thank you very much.
Thank you.